Okay, go on right away.
All right.
So yes, so I don't want to.
Yeah, if you think that'll be helpful, I'm very pleased to help. But actually, in writing, I would require that. If you want me to craft the email, send it to you, you can send it. But I would, this is real easy. And they're going to have their nuts in a sling, I think. Can you please show me any data to conclude that my child doesn't have to worry about an incompatibility reaction? Medicines that can make mistakes. And an mRNA has a
synergistic effect between them.
incompatibility.
But I guess for everyday, it's like, what is the synergistic effect
Of these two.
How do they interact? You know? Yeah, that's a big deal.
Right. So if they can provide that, they can.
What's interesting is they're not required, but they're recommending it for their adult patients. The university system, their program, I must say, their lung, liver, and kidney programs are among the top in the country in terms of graft survival rate and patient survival rate.
Okay.
It's impressive. The numbers are actually quite impressive.
Sure, but
They're above industry.
But unquestionably, that data precedes the COVID era.
Yeah. To another episode of R-Rated Christianity. Yes, I'm going for the lumberjack look today. Came home late, snuck in a quick workout, drank my shake way too fast. So if I burp a little bit or I pause, it's because my wife always busts my chops that I shouldn't eat right before the show, but I have to stop eating by a certain time. So, and then I haven't shaved. I'm not shaving November, December. You know my good luck. No, you don't like it. Don't like. And my hair was all jacked up, so I threw a cap on. Me and Marcos
The Lebanese side's coming.
You got some grays coming in
I
there.
got a grays guy. We got more grays than last year.
Dang.
What are you gonna do? Well, thank you for those of you that join us for the first time. This is a podcast that it's an apologetics podcast, meaning that we give a defense from the word apologia in Greek to give a defense why we follow, believe, and advocate the Christian worldview. Why are we Christians? What does that mean in our lives? Questions that we should all be able to answer if we are claiming to be Christians, followers of Jesus Christ. But it also has to play out in our lives. It can't just be theory. This is not a fraternity we belong to. It's not a cool club or anything like that. This is a worldview, a lifestyle, something that we are persuaded by.
Stop the mics.
Hi, Angel.
It's either
You come
this.
say hi. Oh, wow. What are you doing?
Try the other one. That's what I was asking.
Our 8-year-old just came out.
Oh, that's output. Input.
A little notepad.
Sorry, okay. She's trying to come up with 1,000 words of what she's grateful for. And you have, how many do you have? You have 991? 691.
691.
We're working on it. We'll work on it. Maybe get a. So this will turn into
Making good progress.
PG-rated Christianity while she's out in the garage. We're going to audible. But for those of you who join us on a regular basis, thank you for being here. We hope that how we critically think through current events and then just theological questions helps you with your walk and in your faith, and hopefully that you can help better live it out, because we're supposed to live the word of God. So today we've been getting a lot of questions. I was on a radio show this week to speak as a lawyer, a former prosecutor, and a current defense attorney to speak about this Kyle Rittenhouse case. Rittenhouse. And from a legal perspective,
I was bugging you all week.
You were texting me a few times. I didn't watch all of it, but I caught up. I caught up quickly, and I gave my legal opinion as someone that was the district attorney here in San Antonio, and so we prosecuted cases like this, and of course defended them as well. But then we think to ourselves, well, what does it mean why should a Christian and why should we talk about it here? Because there's principles at play, biblical principles at play that play out in our society. And I guess the question would beg to be asked, or can any one of us have been Kyle Rittenhouse? And what lens should be looking at this situation? Number one, as Christians, as followers of Jesus Christ, we want justice. Micah 6:8, and what does the Lord ask of you? But to seek justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God. Proverbs 17:15 says that to convict the innocent or acquit the guilty, God detests them both. So what does that mean? Jesus came to testify to the truth, John 18:33. If you're truly his disciple, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. We've talked about that on the show before, that God's character is truth. Love, number one, love, truth, and justice. And you don't get justice without good intentions, meaning love, and then truth to prevail. And many times in that process as well. So we have a situation where a young man was, and by the way, in many churches were silent about this, because when it first happened, I mean, the narrative was racist and all kinds of, white supremacy, and racism and white supremacy is always the go-to kind of speaking point of the secular view, the religion of leftism, as we've talked about in here on the show before, because that is something that we should all be able to discuss, and Christianity and those ideals versus the secular ideals and or their theory, and the religion of leftism, as we've talked about it, we speak in those terms. But so from a biblical worldview, why is this concerning to the church, to Christians, to everyday people, because we live in this society? George has some strong opinions about it. And so we just kind of wanted it to be a raw conversation, hopefully interact with some of your questions if you have comments. But also, George and I haven't had a chance to talk thoroughly about this. So I think it'll be a kind of an organic and raw conversation between the critical thinking scientist and hopefully the critically thinking criminal defense lawyer that was the district attorney here. And so I have a very unique perspective on the justice system and trial work. I'm a trial lawyer. And then but my worldview is a biblical one. And so let's just jump in. Tell me your thoughts, George, because you have a lot of opinions about it. And I know you were talking a little bit with Tyler and Jeff before we started on the show. Well, I said, let's just do it raw.
You and I have been texting back and forth about this thing. And I think my perspective is not
comes from not necessarily what's been discussed in the trial, Nico, but what has been avoided or what has largely been not discussed. And that's all the mayhem and destruction that was happening in the backdrop here. Kyle Rittenhouse didn't parachute out of the sky. He didn't come from outer state. Okay, he's what, 15, 20 minutes away in a neighboring community, and he drove 15 minutes to Kenosha. They make it sound like he's some alien that came from faraway place specifically with a gun to kill a bunch of people. That's just completely farcical. So you have this 17-year-old who finds himself in this situation. And my question was, where did this situation come from? What were the circumstances in which he found himself? And I think those are the things that we should be focusing on. What in the world would compel a 17-year-old kid to do what he felt he needed to do? Because, I mean, if you listen to his testimony, he clearly felt like he needed to do what he did, Absolutely. Which was, I think, inarguably an act of self-defense. But Nico, the circumstances is what concerns me.
Well, why does that matter in a Christian discussion? I mean, I know the answer, but I think we should play it through it because there could be some new people watching. We're on YouTube, by the way, right? Live. YouTube, Twitch.
For the same reason,
all these other things.
For the same reason that when we read the scripture, we need to read something in context. We need to contextualize words. So we need to contextualize actions. And I think we need to contextualize Kyle Rittenhouse's actions. And if we don't, then we're going to end up with some skewed narrative. And I think that the prosecution built up a skewed narrative that ultimately led to the filing of these charges. I mean, my position is, why the hell is he even in court? So, okay, I think you could make the argument that there was an illegal possession of a weapon of somebody who's under 18 years of age,
which they're not even pursuing, right?
But let's just let's just put it out there, right? Because that's true. The rest is just insane. So, and I'll tell you what I mean by insane. We have hundreds of individuals, thousands across in Kenosha, thousands across the nation. For the period, this has been going on now since March. Remember, this is March of 2020 when George Floyd was killed, right. And now we are in August 25th, right? So we have a ton of time that has passed, and what's been going on in the nation all that time? We have a bunch of thugs, Black Lives Matter thugs, and Antifa, left-wing thugs that have been going around in the name of systemic racism, destroying and pillaging communities, places of business, many of them Black-owned, in the name of social justice, right? So we've got illegal activity, we have violent activity, we've got cities burning, we've got private property destroyed, we've got, and yes, I'm going to say this because it's just true, Nico, it's objectively true, Democrats, Republicans have their own problems, and we've been brutal on Republicans. They've got their own issues. But this is a Democrat-manufactured scam. These are all Democrat cities, Democrat-led cities. And what are they doing? They're hiding under a desk. They've got their arms crossed. And on Capitol Hill, what are they doing? Pushing for defunding police. So we have Democrat politicians pushing for anarchy. We have anarchy on the streets by left-wing thugs. These are the circumstances that Kyle Rittenhouse found himself in. Why does a 17-year-old feel like he needs to defend a community? Yes, he was invited to defend a place of business, but it was somehow attached to his friend, Dominic Black, I think I have the right name. And so he was invited to do that. But why does a 17-year-old feel like he needs to do that? Because the adults are nowhere to be found. In fact, the adults are pouring gasoline on the fire. And Nico, what I'm saying is we don't look at things like that. We're not looking at that backdrop. We're not looking at, why aren't we looking at the circumstances?
But why does that matter to us? So I guess biblical principles we started off with, because God is a God of truth. We care about truth. We should be truth scavengers. Truth should matter to the follower of Jesus Christ. God's a God of order. He is not a God of disorder, right?
That's exactly right.
Due process, fundamental fair play, which is in our Constitution, is fundamentally a biblical concept. The fact of Proverbs talking about witnesses that come before you and two witnesses and going to the council. And if you cannot, Matthew 18, how you resolve a problem and then going to other people, which you can argue comes from, that's where jury systems come from, going to other people that overlook your matter and give you advice, of course, biblical advice, we would argue, which are still principles, even if you're not a Christian, that do well in a society. So I'm thinking big picture. So it should matter. So George's passion and my passion and our concern for this matter for our society, should matter for you, but the church should be involved in this discussion. The church as a whole should not bear their head in current events because they're afraid of being labeled anything other than a truth scavenger. That's what we should be. And it matters. It matters to our God. It matters to the God of the universe. It matters to the designer of this thing called life. And it matters to his character because it reflects his character. So if we are to be reflective of God's character, truth is objective truth, not subjective truth, not agenda-driven truth, not your truth versus my truth. There's just truth out there. Period. End of story. So I'm trying to look from the 30,000 foot, and then let's work our way down, because what society has pushed on the church, and the church has received it, is, hey, stay in your corner. Talk about your Jesus in your four walls. Yeah, okay, you can have your opinion, but get back in the closet. Get back in the corner. Don't come out in the public square. Don't try to influence us, but hang tight. We'll be going over to you and trying to influence you. I mean, and that's not the Great Commission. Matthew 28:19 says to go to all nations, making disciples of all men, teaching them to obey all that I've commanded. That's all. Notice the word all who are welcome. Whoever so loves, accepts Christ, you have salvation offered to you. It's about all, because God created all. If we truly believe that God is the designer of life, time, matter, and space, well, then we should be involved in trying to influence everything, including our justice system, politics, schools, our home. We're in love, of course, but also courageously.
And not for the sake of influencing them. We're not trying to change culture for the sake of changing culture. Yeah. We're trying to change culture because, again, we need to contextualize our spiritual message and couch our message in social concerns. I mean, if you're a person, everything's social. No? So it comes down to the issues that people are struggling with. So the idea that somehow you can, because there's people that I respect, Nico, in theological circles that take a very hard line on this, that the idea that the Great Commission is strictly focused on the spiritual well-being of a person. And the idea that you venture into political discussions, you're now out of context. And that's nonsense in my view, because you try to appeal to a spiritual message, but you're trying to do that in a way that detaches itself from, again, all the things that people are struggling with in their everyday life. That's nuts.
Well, that's a false narrative. George and I, we do a talk when we do our quarterlies. We've done it at least twice, George. Was Jesus the most influential politician to ever walk the earth? I mean, that's not the title of the conversation, but that's kind of the theme. I mean, Jesus was political. I mean, he dealt with the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Sanhedrins, the Herodians. These were political but religious sects, and that back then, and they influenced each other. I mean, so Jesus was very political. He dealt with political issues, political people. He had talk about the lack of due process. I mean, this guy was an innocent person. Punished for us. We know morally why he did it. We know theologically why it happened. But in a society that was observing from the outside, here's a man that was innocent, was not given due. I think mommy's looking for you, Angel. Was not given due process, and so there you talk about, no truth, no justice, no peace. Well, that applies to Jesus. So why don't you start chanting that for Jesus? And so let's get back to Kyle in this trial, and we can analyze it legally if you want to. Factually, I think it's important for people to understand factually. I think somebody made a comment earlier. I mean, he worked in Kenosha. It was only, like you said, George, 15 minutes away. I have not seen the evidence, so I don't like to speak on something that I have not reviewed myself. But there is an argument that he did not illegally possess that weapon. I don't know what the argument is.
I was just trying to be conservative.
I know, but I want to put it all out there. And unless I see something myself, I'm just going to keep my mind open to discussion.
Nico, that was the way the prosecutor had worded the charges.
I got it.
So I was just trying to play it out and thinking, because I mean, it's a good point. I was thinking, okay, if that's in fact the case,
that's a misdemeanor, by the way, in Wisconsin.
So I mean, all right, that's okay. It. That's what I was trying to say. What are we doing in court?
Yeah.
So, and by the way, you just reminded me. Exodus 22:2-3, getting back to the circumstances and murder and all this stuff. I wish we could put this up on.
Got to figure out a way to do that.
Can we do it? I think it's worth reading.
Well, let me look at it. Can you get it up or no, Jeff? I'll do it. Exodus what?
Exodus 22:2-3. Because again, contextualizing events is absolutely essential. It's not just something smart people do. It's
Can we read it?
Yeah, please.
Exodus 22:2-3. If a thief is caught breaking in at night and is struck a fatal blow, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens after sunrise, the defender is guilty of bloodshed. Okay, let me tell you something, George. I don't think he did this on purpose, but maybe he did. Do you people know? And I don't know what
called
state you're
context.
from,
Oh, go ahead.
but it's great because this is Texas law. By
I was
the way.
going to say,
This is Texas law.
he's the one who told me that.
Yeah, but I didn't realize it was in Exodus 22.
And I just nodded my head because I said, yeah, that's not a new concept.
Yeah,
It's
I mean, this
been
is
there for
this is
3,500
Texas
years.
law. So you can defend life. Okay, so here it is. It's called use of deadly force, and when it's appropriate, when you have the reasonable. So you can defend against the same force placed against you. So if somebody yells at you, you can yell back. You can't hit them. If they can hit you, you can hit back. If they pull a weapon, you can use an equal weapon back. You can use deadly force if it's forced against you. If someone's yelling at you, you can't shoot them, and all this other stuff.
That's right.
And then that's when it looks at the reasonable belief of apparent danger and imminent. That's the standard. The reasonable belief, 1, of apparent danger, 2, not actual, and imminent, meaning immediate. I can give you example after example if you guys want to, but that's the standard in Texas. So in Texas, you can defend your property. I don't recommend this, but I'm just telling you what the law says. You can defend your property at your home at nighttime with deadly force. In daytime, you can't. There's a lot of theories behind why the statute is written that way. It obviously mimics a biblical standard. Whether you can't tell what's going on at nighttime, so whatever the reason is, it's in Exodus 22. I mean, of course, we can have theories on why Texas.
But I love that. First of all, there's an affirmation of private property.
Yep.
It's implicit.
That you can own
What?
property.
There's an implicit affirmation of private property.
Absolutely, yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Just FYI.
Yeah.
For all you
socialists
wannabe
out there.
socialists out there. There's an affirmation of private property and that you can defend that property. And I like what you said, I don't recommend it. Well, you don't recommend it generally because it's dismissive of the particulars of a
I don't recommend it because I don't want you to get hurt. Anything that can be replaced, have at it. That's just to me.
Well,
my kids can't be replaced on this side.
They're breaking into a
No,
home.
I got it, Daddy. No, I'm not saying he shouldn't have done it or whatever. Everybody can say shoulda, woulda, coulda, but the law is the law.
Yes.
What you should have or could have or what you recommend or what somebody else recommends,
Doesn't really matter.
that's kind of irrelevant when you're looking at the elements of a crime.
Right.
I'm just saying for me personally, I mean, if I'm in my house and I see someone breaking into my car outside, unless one of my kids is in my car and they wouldn't be in their car by themselves, I'm just giving you some hypotheticals. I'm going to have a weapon. I'm going to be ready to go. If they try to make it towards the house, I'm going to call the cops and, videotape it, whatever. We have cameras outside. Take the car. It can be replaced. Because I don't want to take a chance of him getting a lucky shot on me.
True enough.
And then I'm not there to raise my kids. That's the only reason why I say I don't recommend it, not because it's not legal.
No, but I love it. But this is, again, context is everything in this discussion. And what we see here is specific circumstances of somebody coming into a home. That's a different deal than, hey, I think somebody's trying to steal my car.
Right.
So, and then the other thing is that if they come in at night, then defender is not guilty of bloodshed. But if it's after sunrise, and so the law here, and by the way, this is all bracketed in Exodus 18. Nico was talking about the penal code. And Exodus 18, 13 to 26, a few chapters before, actually looks at various infractions. It looks at the case behind them, and it looks at the penalties. And what it tries to do, and this whole idea between eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, what that means is you want to avoid excessive punishment, and you want to avoid excessive leniency. Both are evil.
It's metered justice.
And so what's interesting here, so what determines what is what? Well, the circumstances, the context in which somebody's making those decisions. And it's interesting that if you're in the dark and it's confusing, then that benefit of the doubt is appropriated.
That's right, because you can't see, you don't know what they have.
But during the
you
day,
during the day you can see better. That's right.
Escape. And by the way, this is also taught throughout the scripture. Jesus says in the famous, often misquoted passage, Luke chapter 22, verse 36, where he says, hey, if you have a cloak, that's great, but buy a gun.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing.
Buy a sword,
Right?
yeah.
Buy a sword. Because I think Jesus knew, but this is historical fact, that his disciples were going to be accosted in the very least, assaulted in many cases, and that it was appropriate for them to defend themselves because the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit and it matters. It's okay for you to defend yourself. But he also insists on the exercise of wisdom, Nico. Remember a few chapters, a little bit later in verse 39 to 41 of Luke chapter 22, he gets pissed off at Peter because Peter, during his arrest,
Draws it.
Yeah.
draws a sword.
But he
and
wasn't
slices off the ear.
pissed off that Peter had the knife, the sword.
No.
Yeah.
No.
But his choice of how he used it and when he used it,
Yeah.
because he's probably wondering, hey, Peter, where were you? Matthew 17 verses Well, I think it's verse 12, 13.
20
all the
minutes
way-
ago when I called it.
Yeah.
where he said, didn't I just predict that I was going to be arrested?
Pay
Didn't I just
attention,
predict that
guy.
I was going to be crucified for the sake of the redemption of all mankind? This is really not great timing, Peter, really unwise. But this is the same guy that told him by a sword. So what's going on here? Circumstances matter. And what I'm suggesting is this whole trial is happening in pretend land.
Well, let me tell you,
What was happening wasn't happening.
as a former district attorney, what I heard, and if somebody here can confirm this, I heard that Kyle was indicted within 2 or 3 days.
Right away.
Well, why? Is that accurate, Tyler?
That's an excellent
That's
point.
insane to me. I mean, as someone, I prosecuted capital murders. I mean, all of us did.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way that you can do your due diligence on a case that complex with that type of mob in the dark. You have to dissect all that evidence. You have to look at all the film. You have to take all the witness statements. I mean, including the one that was injured in the arm.
Great point.
And you can't talk to him right away. He's going to be treated.
Great
I mean,
point.
there's no way you did your due diligence.
Yeah.
And to indict on that quickly, there's just no way.
It has been said that the prosecution kind of grabbed the case out of the detective's hands like prematurely. They're like, we
It's
got
obvious.
and we got to go with it.
There's no way.
So-
There's no way.
So, I'm a faux lawyer. This is a real lawyer. But I know that it's very unusual, and I mentioned risky earlier in a text to somebody, that Kyle Rittenhouse, the defendant, would take to stand. But what you just said is probably some of the reason why, Nico, he's been barraged in the media as a monster, domestic terrorist, white supremacist
Racist.
piece of you-know-what. And so this kid's probably been chomping at the bit to correct the record and set the record straight and say, look, nothing could be farther from the truth. Just hear me out. And of course, I think you tell me, you've been, you are a defense lawyer. It seems to be the defense that I'm wondering, the defense is sitting there watching the prosecution implode.
Just hang themselves.
Because now there's been 2 instances, I counted 2, maybe there's more,
With the
of
judge.
whether they badger witnesses, the prosecutor. And they're probably like, let this guy implode.
Yep.
The
You talking
judge
about the prosecutor?
right.
Oh yeah, I would
defense
just let
attorney
him.
is
I would
probably
let
sitting
him.
there saying,
Just let him.
Doing less
I would hand
is
him more
better
rope.
here.
Yeah.
The defense is probably thinking,
Yep.
I'm going to sit here, my arms crossed, and I'm going to watch this prosecution implode and fail completely to establish guilt.
But what if
Why
Kyle
would-
trips up? That's the risk,
So
right?
that's the question. What if Kyle implodes? And I think they
I just think it was
realized-
risky for him to testify.
Yeah, but in the
I mean,
end,
I don't know
it's
if
been
he
working
needed to.
out
Look,
for
the
him.
bottom line is you have to prepare for both. You have to with the audible. First of all, when you would shed your
Yeah.
client, your witness,
Yeah.
your client, meaning that you do a sample cross examination, you don't have the same element. You don't have a jury staring at you. You don't have the cameras because they knew there was going to be cameras in the courtroom. You don't have an unfriendly person. You know, with the intent to slip you up. I mean, it's a risk, and with the state's case going as bad as it appeared to, because I didn't watch every bit of it.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear their theory later. Yeah, I think it played out well for them.
Tyler
the
told me to
little
study up, so I went and
It's-
sat.
well, it sounded like it went well.
You're speaking
Nico,
very-
context, right?
Yeah,
So remember, preceding this decision,
I do think the judge was a little
and please correct
emotional.
Please correct me if I'm wrong.
I love him.
But people are like, I've heard terminology, and I'm glad Andy McCarthy, who's a great lawyer that I try to follow, made this point. It's not like the defense let Kyle Rittenhouse testify. It's Kyle Rittenhouse's prerogative.
It's his choice. That's
okay,
right.
it's his constitutional
It's his
prerogative.
right.
But what's interesting is before this, we know the prosecution, because the witness came forward, his own witness came forward and said he was in a private session. The prosecutor was compelling me or kind of nudging me to kind of change my presentation of the fact.
Man, that's just horrific.
The defense probably thought, this guy's
golly.
got a history of beating the you-know-what out of witnesses. If he did that for his own witness, can you imagine what it'll do to Rittenhouse? He's going to make Rittenhouse look like a hero, and I think it's moving in that
But
direction.
his
I could be
witness
wrong.
changed
Wow,
the
that's an
story
interesting
from
perspective.
I was holding the gun, I wasn't holding the gun. And within
I don't
seconds.
understand why it was such a surprise. I mean, if you did your homework and you prepared for trial, I mean, you knew that the guy that was shot in the bicep was pointing the gun at him before he shot. And then I think the prosecutor actually made the insinuation that, but wait a minute, he hadn't shot yet. Now let me tell you, Texas law, Wisconsin law seems to be very similar. The reasonable belief, I'm going to explain this to you, of apparent danger. Let's think of reasonable, apparent, and imminent, meaning immediate. So what's reasonable? Is it reasonable that he thought his life was in danger? Well, yeah, someone had been shot. There was guns pointed at them. Mob attack is already deadly force. Just even if they didn't have guns, you can be beat to death. I mean, more people are bludgeoned to death than anyone ever realizes. I assure you that. You can look up the stats on that. So is that reasonable? Yes, I think there's a reasonable standard met. Apparent danger, that's interesting to a lot of people. And I'll give you the example that I use. If we're all, and not that I go to Starbucks, I'm just going to use Starbucks as an example. We're on a coffee shop and we're all just sitting there and someone walks in, I mean, in a trench coat or a jacket and says, "Oh, you sons of bitches need to die in here drinking this coffee," and does this and reaches back. What the law says in Texas and apparently in Wisconsin too is, "Hey, George, Jeff, Tyler, you think he's got a gun back there? I don't know. Let's wait and see." I mean, we don't have, you have a right not to be a victim. So apparent danger. So I draw my weapon, lean, boom, 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 shoot,
That's right.
and then drop him. We find out later on he was pulling out a journal that said, "All these some bitches in this coffee shop need to die." Didn't have a gun. Were we in actual danger? We were not in actual danger. We were in apparent danger. And was it imminent? Yes. Okay. It was immediate. If we didn't act, if I didn't act, I mean, we're seconds.
You have no idea.
Action beats reaction
Right.
every time.
Right.
So, cause that's it. So that's that analysis. Same analysis. Guy walks in, butt ass naked. "Oh, you some bitches in this coffee house need to die." Can I draw my gun and shoot him?
No.
From a distance? He's not next to you.
No.
He's by himself. He's about 20, 30 feet away. There's a
Not doing
21-foot
anything.
rule. It's informal 21-foot rule with a knife. If you're good with your knife, you can hurt somebody or kill somebody within a 21-foot rule before you can draw your weapon. But aside from all that, let's say, can I shoot him? No.
And no, grabbing his private parts doesn't count.
Well, no, unless he has a bomb in his ass. I mean, he's butt ass naked. So what is he reaching for? So is it reasonable? It's reasonable for someone to walk into a coffee shop and cause damage because it's reasonable for them to walk in a church, in a yoga studio, in a movie theater. Everything's reasonable these days. Okay, what was it? Apparent danger. It wasn't actual, and it wasn't even apparent. What is he reaching for? Unless we think he's got a bomb or a gun taped to his back, which is not. It's not apparent. It's not. And was it imminent? Well, there was imminent if there was actual danger. So I couldn't shoot him in that situation. Does that make sense to you guys? So. Yes. Wisconsin law seems to be similar, but from that analysis, and I'm only going to use Texas law because I have not studied up on Wisconsin law, but it appears to be similar. Was it reasonable? Yes. Was it apparent? It was more than apparent. It was actual danger. He was in actual danger from a skateboard, which could be deadly force, by the way. A hammer can be, a pencil can be, a pen, a knife, a gun, a car, steel-toed boots. I mean, everything can be.
A
lot of things
grabbing
can be.
his gun, having his gun grabbed.
There was guns.
Having a pistol pointed at his
but
face.
the actual number of people attacking him. I just don't see in good conscience.
That's right.
How, I mean, seriously, and I mean this, and I remember I've done it on both sides. You get commentations from people that are just criminal defense lawyers or prosecutors. I mean, I've done them both at the highest level. So and on top of all of that, my highest level is I'm a truth seeker and I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. So I just don't see in good conscience. I would love to have been a fly on the wall, and I think I would know what I would heard if I was a fly on the wall, why this prosecution was brought forward on those charges. On those, I just don't see it. But I'm open to learning something.
That the prosecutor is almost taking Kyle and he's making him doubt himself. He's trying to normalize the fact that there's a riot going on. Like, this is normal stuff, right?
That's
Why
exactly
are you out here? Why are you down here at 9 o'clock?
Yeah,
I think
all
that's
these
the
people
crux
can
of
be
the
here,
issue. That's
but
the
you
crux
can't.
of the issue. This is my point. In the backdrop, there is a coordinated. This isn't like 1968 with those riots. This isn't like Rodney King in 1992. Those things what's the word? They were organic.
Mm-hmm.
People were.
This was coordinated, it
people
seems
were on
like,
their
at that
last
time, yeah.
nerve. What's going on here is a coordinated effort.
Yeah.
You've got people that are being shipped in, bussed in
Yeah.
to foment unrest. This is a left-wing death cult that is hell-bent on undermining and destroying the country.
Yes.
There's no question about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you've got a party, yes, Democrats, that's right. You've got a party that is aiding and abetting this, sitting silent and working actively to undermine and defund law enforcement at the same time that this is happening.
Yeah.
And so it's just maddening to me. It's just totally dismissed. It's like, I'm like in an alternate reality. Nobody's talking about it. The idea that you get to evaluate this young man apart from those circumstances is unjust in itself before you even get into the facts of the case.
This is the result, Jeff and Tyler. This is the result of a society that has lost their moral compass.
That's right.
When you think and why the church needs to have been influencing. And when the church either, number one, goes along to get along and cares about being liked versus credible, that's a problem.
Yep.
And if they're not girded up in courage, 2 Timothy 1:7, God didn't give us a spirit of timidity. Ephesians 4:15, speak the truth in love, but with courage. Matthew 10:16, be shrewd as a snake, but innocent as a dove. And then you can go through, Luke 9, Luke 12, Mark 8, Mark 13. Don't be ashamed of me to advocate my principles. This is Christ talking, or I'll be ashamed of you and deny you. And so you bring all these ideas and these principles together that are biblical. I mean, Christians don't just get together and hang around other Christians and then sing Kumbaya or sing our praise and worship songs and then take our communion once a month or once a week or however your church does it, and then just pray by ourselves and then stays quiet and keeps it in our cubicle or keeps it to ourselves and doesn't take us everywhere we go. That's not what Christians are called to do. We're called to be influencers. Because if you're not trying to influence somebody else towards Christ, then they're influencing you, and being silent is influence. Speaking, I mean, it's true. That truly is. We're not called. Now we have to pray for wisdom. Let me say this: don't be an idiot. We always talk about in Exodus also, there's a 10th commandment. Don't be an idiot. Don't be a dumbass. I mean, obviously pray for wisdom on how you present Christ and the gospel, and hopefully you're living it out the best way you can, not perfectly. All that plays into this. But so you have a 17-year-old and people in that community that felt they couldn't rely on police. Remember, at that time, police stations were being burned down. Federal courthouses were being burned. And it appeared that nobody was doing anything about it. Like, that was just the norm. I mean, to me, this is like Mexico
But
shit.
somehow January 6th is the worst
Well, I
thing
mean,
since the
that's a
Civil
whole
War.
different discussion. That's
I know.
hypocrisy. That's that's illogical, because this, again, principles have to apply in every setting. That's my point. Ideas have consequences. And so what I try to encourage people, and George and I and us, we try to have people and engage people on the level of ideas. Don't label the idea yet. Is it a good idea to let people burn police stations to where helicopters have to airlift police officers out of their own police station? When that shit happens, then your society's done. And if you don't feel like you need to gird up and defend yourself, then nothing will happen. I mean, look at that lawyer in I don't know what, Missouri. I mean, he's in a pink polo having dinner with his wife, and people are marching through this private community. And he brings an AR-15, the horrible gun safety. I mean, the way they were carrying their guns, and she drove me insane the way she was carrying that little 380. Different discussion. But they felt, and these are people that identified with the political platform that was advocating this type of behavior.
Yeah, they were Democrats.
And they just said, screw these ideas. These are not the ideas that I stand for.
Right.
And they were protecting themselves. And they said, move along, don't come here. And then they were attacked as if, I mean, the idea that the bullet it didn't leave the barrel of the gun yet, which seems like the prosecutor's point is being made. You weren't victimized yet. I have to wait to be a victim. I don't get a second chance. I can give you case after case after case that I've prosecuted or seen where that bullet leaves that barrel. You might not get a second chance at this deal. This is not a paintball war or fun and games, Nerf football or something. I mean, these are real bullets that have real consequences on this side of heaven.
So
Can I ask
I'd
you-
like to, please.
Just saying in a hypothetical sense, if the jury finds him not guilty, do the lawsuits start flying on all the
Are
media
you
that's
kidding me?
saying?
Should they or do they? I don't
Sure,
know
if we
they
can
do.
find a courthouse that isn't in flames. I'm gonna state something because I don't think I can top it, and I just like to get your thoughts and get some commentary. This is from an informed person. Okay, what is sickening is the pretend act that in the background we don't really have dozens of rabid pieces of you know what, committing blatant illegal acts of violence and destruction against Kenosha property, private and public, and its citizenry. But Kyle Rittenhouse is the focus. We better get this left-wing cult out of office, or pretty soon we will all be Kyle Rittenhouse. And that is who ultimately is the real target here. Anyone and everyone who dares stand up to these barbarians. Wow. So which part of that is inaccurate?
Well, none of it is. It was you, George. I mean, none of it's inaccurate. I mean, that's
it's not in the church.
Imagine this prosecutor was the judge.
How
to
does
your
the
point,
church get special dispensation?
That's exactly right. The church has an obligation to speak on this. It does. I mean, it's their duty. The church can't say, well, that's not my lane. I'm going to stay in my lane. We're just going to stick to, this is a church issue because this is a life issue. The church are supposed to be influencers of life. We're supposed to influence people to do life differently, which leads them to Christ, so Christ can offer them the gift of salvation. That's what we're called to do. We're called to influence. We're called to campaign for heaven, campaign for Jesus. And our politics, I mean, 2 Corinthians 5, we say it on the show all the time as a political statement. We're ambassadors for heaven, for Christ. That means that we are representing heaven in a foreign land. So the church has to be involved in these discussions and should be commenting on this. This is not a stay in your lane, church. Stick to your little bullshit, sermons and don't worry about this stuff. This is out of your lane. No, it's all in our lane because principles and ideas apply here. Matter of fact, the justice system is filled with biblical principles. From due process to bringing witnesses to, Proverbs 17, the first to speak in court sounds correct until the cross-examination begins. That's from Proverbs.
Right.
That's a biblical principle. The idea of a judge. It's in Isaiah 33:22, the three branches of government. We can go on and on about biblical principles that seep their way, very intentional, by the way, by our founding fathers, because of this experiment called the United States of America under a transcendent God, because we were given inalienable rights that the government didn't give to us, that God, our creator, gave to us. And the government's job is to protect the rights that God gave all of us. Every creed, every ethnicity, everybody. Both genders, there's only two, by the way. All of us, every person. That's what the government's role is.
And
the government's role is to protect God's given rights to us, to everybody.
Absolutely.
Period.
And having this knowledge is absolutely essential for the believer in the United States of America, because the believer is enjoying the benefits of this philosophy.
Okay.
The believer is enjoying the legal framework of the Constitution. The believer is enjoying all of these assets. And it's just really piss poor stewardship to hide under a desk or hide in the church talking about nonsense, about stuff nobody cares about.
That's right.
And that's the real tragedy here. Nico said that the church sat idly by, paraphrasing, but I don't think the church sat idly by. The church actually borrowed false narratives and pitched them.
Yep.
It was disgusting what happened in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing. Absolutely disgusting. We had churches in San Antonio who should be ashamed of themselves and all across the country parroting this drivel of systemic racism and really putting a bullseye on the average white person,
Right.
which is the subject of critical race theory, which is now taught in many schools across the country. Congratulations. Thanks for sitting idly by and helping this deception take root in the country. This is outrageous.
We have comments that I would like to just pitch to you guys if you'd like to answer them real quick.
Sure.
Diana asked a question. It's a
Sure.
two-parter. She said, why would law enforcement give anyone authority, let alone a kid, to keep a crowd in order? And then part two would be, and allow a kid to walk around with such a weapon knowing it could turn bad, a child to be put all in danger.
law enforcement didn't do that.
Law enforcement didn't do that, Dana.
There was no law enforcement.
There was no
they were
law
gone.
enforcement. That was the problem.
There
If
was no
law
cops.
enforcement was doing their job, there wouldn't have been
That's
burnings. There wouldn't have been riots. There wouldn't have been people being injured.
Correct.
A person would feel comfortable staying home and thinking, hey, the fight's not going to come to me eventually. So that's number one. It's not
Great
like
point.
Kyle went and got permission and they said, okay, go ahead and you can patrol. He was exercising his constitutional right. He can do it. He didn't go out looking for trouble. He was there. If the crowd or the riot would not have continued to converge on them, there would have been no incident. We wouldn't be talking about this. He would have gone back home, put away his weapon, and that would have been done.
No, this is
A 17-year-old's an adult.
Yes, that's right.
It's not a child. The age of accountability used to be 13, Diana. But I'm going to just go off on a little bit of a tangent. Reader's Digest, I think it was in 1944, came up with a term that I believe and another person and many people believe was horrible for our society. And the term was teenager. So, and I was one of these people. I said, oh shit, they're just a teenager. What the hell do they know? But 13, was it James Madison? He was an ambassador for the United States. We have example after example of 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds in the Civil War fighting behind enemy lines where their musket was taller than them, but they were fighting. The Pony Express, where 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds were crossing the country in a horse by themselves to deliver mail. The age of accountability. You graduated in 8th grade. From 8th grade, and that exit exam was insanely difficult. At Wall Builders, they have it. I looked at it. I couldn't pass it today. But you were of age of accountability. And Mary had Jesus at 13 years old, right back then. Culture and life started much sooner back then. So a 17-year-old is an adult. In our justice system, as you may know, you're not in juvenile system anymore. You're an adult. An 18-year-old in Texas can own a weapon. You can carry a rifle with you in your vehicle. You cannot buy a handgun until 21, which is a little odd. I mean, so there's the age requirement on different things, from smoking to driving to drinking to serving our country and dying in the military to buying a weapon here. It's really all over the place, and there's no rhyme or reason. So we can have a discussion about that.
I was going to say, but still, for the purposes of the discussion,
Yeah.
he was a kid. Let's start there. I get what there's a clear difference between a 17-year-old kid and a Democrat leader of the city
Mhm.
and a Democrat mayor.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So my argument has been that there were no adults in the room. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And to the extent there were any adults, they were hiding in the shadows, in many cases applauding what was going on. This is insane. And so Democrat cities, I'm going to be very particular about that. This is not a partisan statement. It's just it's a statement of fact.
Yep.
Democrat cities across the country opened their doors to this because they saw it as an opportunity to politically advance their agenda. They've been chomping at the bit. We've talked many times in here, Nico, about the radicalization of American society in our schools. That bomb's been ticking a while. They've been looking for an opportunity to do that. And the George Floyd death, God rest his soul, was exploited. This is what's tragic. It was exploited to bring in a quick advancement of this agenda, which was lying in wait for years and years and years. And that's what's been happening here. And they've been applauding this. So I asked myself, and you're probably asking the same thing, what the hell was going on that a 17-year-old felt like he needed to do this?
Well, but I want to make sure I answer Diana one more time. I know there's other questions and comments too. I just happened to be looking over here and I saw it. What I would hope for, whether we think it was smart or not, doesn't mean it was illegal. What I saw, from what I've seen from a legal standpoint, I don't believe he did anything illegal. I just don't, Diana. I mean, I don't know if I haven't seen all the evidence. I'm open to that. I just haven't seen it. I definitely saw the gunfire. I saw the actual behavior, the incident that led to these charges of homicide. And I don't believe that was homicide. I don't believe it was, for us, we call it murder. It'd be first
How many
degree
times
murder
did you
here.
get hit with a skateboard before it's...
Well, but even before that, I'm even before that. You see, I'm going to analyze it even before that, because you have to look at the totality of the circumstances. But I would just hope, because I know Diana, and we're more than acquaintances, we're friends, and there's mutual respect here. But Diana, I would hope that the same standard of accountability is applied to the mobs. What about the mobs and the burnings and the destruction of property? See, nobody looks at that unless it's their house.
Right.
I mean, we have to be very careful when it's on our front door and we're seeing these bad ideas. It's never a good idea to let people not air their grievances in an unconstitutional way. Our Constitution allows for protests. I am a huge supporter of constitutional protests. They're allowed, they should be protected. The government should help nurture those, or not nurture them, but protect our rights to do that and air our grievances against the government constitutionally. It is not a constitutional right to damage property or to injure people. That is not a constitutional right. Outside of that, that is called a riot. That is violent behavior. That is deadly force when you have that many people with a wolf pack mentality, and it's dangerous. And so so I would just hope that the same standard of accountability is criticized, because when you're burning federal buildings, when you're burning police stations, when you're burning police cars, that is telling your community, F you.
And that it's okay.
That nobody can control me. And then everybody's in danger. And then when you have businesses, people that worked all their lives, and man, you know, my mom grew up on the South Side. Diana, you know how my mindset, I mean, people that are hungry and entrepreneurs, everything's being destroyed and nobody gives a shit about that. I mean, we just got to hold everybody accountable. That's why the implication of ideas and principles and standards from a biblical worldview apply to everybody. Yes, Diana? To Democrats and Republicans, because I don't give a crap about the political platform. I care about the ideas that are being advocated by that political platform. And whichever side loses their mind and tells me and my God and Jesus and my Bible to go piss on ourselves, I'm going to say piss on you, and I'm going to advocate against you.
I want to, and this is,
I'm just saying in general.
I'm with you, but this is unusual for me because I'm no fan of what many Republicans have done, particularly, you know, in the COVID era. I think they've been silent in many cases, and I think they've been overly passive. But this issue, I'm sorry, this falls at the feet of Democrats.
Sure.
This was not a Republican-induced problem. That's good, yes. This was not a Republican-induced problem. This is not being exploited by Republicans. This is being exploited by Democrats. And now They're cornered. They don't know what to do. Think about their options. If they have law enforcement, if they support their local police department, right? What happens? And something happens. Like, let's take in the aftermath in Minnesota. Literally a month later, I believe, I think around April 23rd, George Floyd was March 25th. A month later, you had the Brooklyn Center Police Department shot a black man with an outstanding warrant. What happens? Boatloads of riots. What does the governor do? He calls in the National Guard. So is that what we're going to do now? So that's one option. The other option is you do nothing. You don't have a police department. And then you have crime waves go skyrocketing, right, through the stratosphere. Does that seem like a great way to live? So now they have to pick between these two extremes. Why? It gets back to Exodus 22:2-3. Because excessive punishment and excessive leniency are both evil. And they're being excessively lenient. Why? Because they believe that they can use the BLM death cult and the Antifa death cult to usher in a new order here in the United States, to raise the country to the ground and to erase our constitutional precedents. This is outrageous. How does the Christian church stay passive?
Can't.
How does the Christian church just mosey on
It seems
from
like
CD sale to CD sale? This is outrageous, man.
It seems like
It really is
Go ahead,
outrageous.
Tyler. I'm going to make a
My
comment.
question is how, like, when the United States first started up, it had to have been, and I'm not a big history buff, but it had to have been controversial because there's a country that was being founded under Christian principles, right? I mean, how did they handle that politically back then? Maybe I'm asking a question you don't.
Well, I think that some of the issues we've talked about in our seminars, but remember, this happened. The sort of the argument for the revolution was an old argument, and it had seasoned over time. And it started really in the aftermath of the French and Indian War, which ended in 1763. It started in 1755, ended in 1763. And what happened is that England was essentially bankrupt, and they began to really squeeze the colonies for every penny that they had. And the Stamp Act is ultimately sort of what broke the camel's back. And you had injustice after injustice. In fact, the grievances were listed in the Declaration of Independence. You should read them. They're horrible grievances. This had been going on for years. And Ben Franklin had made, I don't know how many trips to Parliament to plea. To actually, he was appealing on the basis of English law, which had been violated on the premise of the divine right of kings. Okay, so what they do, they told him to screw off, and things got completely intolerable.
And so at this moment,
so they have the legal,
is becoming lawless.
Keep in mind, it says 1763 to 1776 is 13 years. So we got 13 years of legal and moral justification, moral basis for what ultimately led to signing the Declaration.
I'm gonna answer Joe Moncada's comment in a second. Kim Finney, I just want to make sure. I hope he doesn't. Well, Joe, I'm glad did it help, Tyler?
Yeah.
I was going to mention it.
Joe. So I don't know when you jumped on, and Eddie, I think, responded to you. So this is a current event. What happens too much, Joe, is the church and Christian circles avoid current events. And that's unacceptable. As Christians, the most political statement Jesus made in Matthew 28:19, going to all nations, making disciples of all men, teaching to obey all that I've commanded. And so God's not politically correct. He's biblically correct. He doesn't care about PC. His ideas and what he holds sacred and what he loves and what he hates. Because societies change. Political persuasions change. Political platforms change. But the ideas that are supported by political platforms are eternal, maybe, and have challenged societies from the beginning of time, from the Bible days and Old Testament to New Testament to modern times. And so there's principles undergirding what's happening in our society. So all we try to do is just handle, I'm sorry, George, we just try to handle current events. We do. Which we should. Next week, we might be talking about James chapter 4 for whatever reason, or Ephesians 2, which Ephesians 2:14 is one of the prescriptions to bringing people together and knocking down that wall of hostility between two groups, making them one in Christ. Ephesians 2:14, get it, if you can study that at some point. But so, Joe, the point is the church is not political, and the root word of politics just means to influence, to advocate for the affairs of the city. So what do we want the affairs of our society and the city to be? What ideas do you want governing your life, our lives, our justice system, our schools, our children. So that's it. So, I mean, Jesus was political
Everything's political.
without pushing a platform. His platform was heaven. Our platform should be a biblical one. And whatever political platform supports our biblical advocacy, we should be behind. Not an RRD. I mean, Sam Rodriguez, I think, says it best. His political party isn't represented by an elephant or a donkey. It's by the Lamb of God. We are biblically minded people that should be advocating for heaven as ambassadors for Christ. And then whatever platform that lays us on today might be different in 15 years. I don't know. That's why I stand by ideas, not a political platform per se, but the ideas that undergird.
And I
that
think Eddie,
platform. That's all.
Eddie might have a point that you haven't been watching long enough. Because I mean, where do we start? We mentioned Exodus 18, 13
22
to 26. We mentioned Exodus 22, 2 and 3. We talked about Luke chapter 22, verse 36,
Micah
39
6:8.
through 41, Micah 6:8. We talked about Matthew chapter 17. I mean, my goodness.
Proverbs 17.
We've couched
Over the place.
our positions and our thinking, our rationale on biblical principles.
That's right.
And I think Nico's point is very important. Okay, now how shall we live?
Right.
We have
Right.
knowledge about what the Bible says from a principle perspective. Society is coming undone at the seams. How does this information and that God has equipped us with, how can we use this information by God's grace to transform our culture in His direction?
Yeah.
Period. And if you're uncomfortable with that,
Well, I hope it helps, Joe.
I hope it's helpful.
I mean, I
But
hope
if you're
it was
really
helpful.
uncomfortable with that kind of approach, then
Well, I mean,
you might not feel
that's
at
all.
home here. I
Look,
hope you'll
guys,
stick around.
look, there's no. Let me say this, and George and I have been advocating this, and I advocated this when I was in office. There should be no topic or issue that's off limits for the Christian. None. We're supposed to try to influence everything because God has influenced our life, and He's supposed to influence everything in our lives. Remember, we're claiming something supernatural, Joe. I'm assuming that you're a follower of Jesus Christ. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But I hope you will be someday. But we're claiming that the Holy Spirit indwells inside of us when we give our life to Christ. Romans 10:9, right? Believe in your heart, profess with your mouth, and you truly believe in your heart, though, not just make a profession. I mean, all in. Well, then it changes the way we look at things. We don't have these glasses on anymore. We get spiritual LASIK surgery in our heart. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to live perfectly because I'm a broken ass bitch. I promise you that. I'm just a little less broken than yesterday, hopefully. But I'm looking up as my example. I'm looking at yesterday's mirror as my gauge of how I'm doing on my spiritual compound interest. Am I doing better? And then what do I do with it? What do you do with this new faith? If you're a new believer or if you're a seasoned believer, what do you do with it? I mean, if you were indicted for being a follower of Jesus Christ, and if I was your defense attorney, would I have this conversation with you and say, damn, you are screwed. They got way too much evidence against you. We just got a plea bargain. You're done. You're going to be found guilty. Guilty of being a Christian? Yes. Have you seen the evidence against you? Right?
But wait,
I mean,
aren't you a Christian too, Nico?
Huh?
Aren't you a Christian too, Nico?
Well, no, but I'm just saying that if you want to bring it in, that is the mindset of our lives. Now, it doesn't mean perfect. I don't want you to be a goofy Christian or corny. Or the Westboro Baptists are not Christians. They're a bunch of dumbasses married to their first cousins. They're weirdos. They're not Christians. People bastardize God's word for their own agenda. I get it. You don't judge a worldview, a faith, or an idea by its abuse. You judge it by its ideals. And so study Christian worldview, study the Bible, study the life of Jesus Christ, and don't judge it by a bad Christian in your life, or maybe you're the one, or maybe I'm the one, I don't know, but judge it by the ideals, and the ideal is the life of a first century Jew named Jesus. That's it.
And again, we've brought this up because this really isn't about Kyle Rittenhouse. This is about you. It really is. You see, what we're seeing here is an attack on a young man, even though it's blatantly obvious from every angle that he was defending himself. A double homicide charge. And like Nico said, he was indicted almost instantly and has been repeatedly and systematically in national media.
Yeah.
Okay? This is outrageous. It's unbelievably unjust. And so what does this have to do with us? It can happen to any one of us. And by the way, that's the message here. That's the message that this prosecution is bringing. Don't you dare even think, when your house is on fire, when your car is being destroyed, when your family is in imminent danger, don't you even think about defending yourself. And if you do, we'll come after you and we will throw the book at you. We will lie, we will cheat and steal, we will make you guilty, period. Is that the kind of world we want to live in? This is not the USSR. This is not Soviet Russia. But that is exactly where we're going here. And so all I'm saying is, and I don't want to speak for you, but
Okay.
I know we're in agreement. The church has a pivotal, central, important role here
In society.
because we are agents of truth. We are all called to be apologists. We're Christian apologists. I like Dr. Douglas Gruthis' definition of apologetics. And you should get that book, by the way. It's called Christian Apologetics by Doug Gruthis, Groothus. And he defines apologetics as the defense of the Christian worldview in a way that is rationally compelling, that is objectively true, and subjectively engaging. We're trying to show you here that this is a matter of apologetics, that the church should be the best apologist for justice here.
Yeah.
And the church is silent.
Yeah.
It's not saying
That's all.
anything. And to the degree it's talking, it's borrowing false narratives and it's teaching them to their young people or sitting by while their young people adopt all this crap and fall into deception. That's got to stop.
Yeah.
We need to be better stewards of the freedoms that we have.
Look, guys,
We really do.
we should be doing this with all topics. Matthew 28:19 are our marching orders from our Savior. He's our King. And he says to go into all nations, meaning whoever you're come in contact with, and make disciples of them, make students. How do you do that? Unless there's a 2 Timothy 4 kind of correct, encourage, or rebuke. There's a standard we have to go by to hold ourselves accountable, number one, right? James 1:22, don't just hear the word, do what it says. So don't be a hypocrite, essentially. But how do we influence people if we don't advocate and defend a standard, period, in every aspect? And we've talked about it early on the show and other shows about the biblical influence in every aspect of our government, including our justice system. And so we're supposed to be truth scavengers as followers of Jesus Christ. And so we should care about the truth. We really should. And we can't be quiet about it. We should hate injustice. God hates injustice. And so it doesn't matter what political platform is wrong. We're with God. We're up here. We're right. We don't talk. I don't remember what pastor I heard this from. We keep talking in our society about right versus left instead of up versus down. That's the Christian worries about up versus down. Wherever that puts us on the spectrum of right versus left, we shouldn't care. Wherever we land, we land. But our advocacy is up versus down. This is truly good versus evil in general, whether it's this circumstance or not, what's happening in our schools, what's being taught from our schools, whether we can control our children's lives, whether we're the stewards of our children, and Psalm 127:3, that children are a heritage, a gift from God, or not. Whether we believe Jeremiah 1:5, whether we believe all these things and understanding that God has gifted us with our kids and that we are stewarding and trying to raise or start a child in the way they shall go, and when they get older, they will not depart from it, Proverbs 22. Do we believe these things or not? So it's these principles and ideas that God in heaven has advocated through Christ and the prophets into this world, into influencing this thing called life. And we are to acknowledge God. If we are saved, then we should be grateful for the gift of salvation. And that gratitude we can't keep it to ourselves. And that we pray for wisdom, that we go out with courage, but grace and mercy and love ultimately, and advocate for heaven. That's it. It's simple, not easy. Okay. Simple concept if you really understand and believe our faith, just not easy to implement, because Jesus said in John 17:15, if they hate you, don't forget they hated me first. And in this world, John 16:33, you will have trouble, but have heart, I've overcome the world. And we've gone over those scriptures over and over again, from James 1:2-4 to Romans 5:3-5 and all the other ones, okay? So guys, thanks for putting up with us. Hope it helps to just think through and critically think through a current event that happens to be now, how a biblical worldview and idea and principles, biblical principles, can apply and how it's influenced our justice system. Hopefully you gain something from it. Who knows what we'll be talking about next week. We'll always take suggestions. If you want to do more of a theological study, let us know through the comments or private message, or that or not. And we're just happy because this is about you guys. It's not about us. We have conversations. We teach the men's Bible study and different studies, but we really want to make sure that we're hopefully helping you walk better and closer with Christ, so we can ultimately be salt in life as we're asked to be, meaning truth preservatives. That's what salt was in the ancient world. And then illuminate dark situations with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Thanks, guys. God bless you. Have a great week.